The Ottoman cannons had been silent for exactly 17 minutes when King John Sobieski gave the order that would echo through eternity. On September 12, 1683, 18,000 exhausted horsemen charged downhill into the heart of 300,000 Ottoman warriors, the most powerful army on earth. Within 4 hours, the entire Ottoman Empire's century-long dream of conquering Europe would die on the walls of Vienna. 300,000 versus 18,000, these numbers shouldn't work. The fate of Christian Europe hung by a thread as thin as a cavalry saber. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the largest cavalry charge in history shattered an empire, why a Polish king's split-second decision saved Western civilization, and the shocking reason the Ottomans' greatest strength became their ultimate downfall. 3 revelations await. First, the secret weapon that made 18,000 cavalry worth 300,000 infantry. Second, why the Ottoman commander's fatal obsession with luxury sealed his army's doom. Third, how a dying city's last desperate gamble triggered the charge that changed history. In 1683, Europe wasn't winning against Islam. It was dying, city by city. The Ottoman Empire had devoured kingdoms for 3 centuries. Now, only Vienna stood between them and total European conquest. But here's what makes no sense. Why would a Polish king save an Austrian emperor who hated him? How do you break an army that hadn't lost a major battle in 200 years? What made September 12th different from the 59 days of hell before it? Let me set the stage for the day God wore Polish armor. Picture Europe in 1683, not the powerful continent you know, but a fractured, terrified collection of kingdoms watching the Ottoman Empire devour everything in its path. They called it the Devourer of Nations, and for good reason. Controlling 3 continents, commanding armies that moved like clockwork, the Ottoman Empire was the superpower nobody could stop. At the head of this unstoppable force stood Kara Mustafa Pasha, the silk-clad destroyer, educated in the Sultan's palace, veteran of 20 campaigns. He wore diamond-studded armor and traveled with a mobile palace. But beneath the luxury beat the heart of a ruthless conqueror who'd burned cities and enslaved thousands. His obsession? Vienna gateway to conquering all of Europe. Standing against him was Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, Vienna's Iron Count. Shot twice in previous battles, refusing to show pain, he commanded through sheer willpower. His 22,500 defenders faced impossible odds, but Starhemberg had turned Vienna into a geometric nightmare for attackers' star-shaped walls, overlapping fields of fire, underground tunnels. Still, mathematics favored Mustafa. Enter King John III Sobieski of Poland, the Lion of Lechistan to his enemies. At 54, arthritis twisted his joints, but this veteran of 40 battles remained Europe's greatest cavalry commander. Here's the twist. Habsburg Emperor Leopold I, whom Sobieski was racing to save, had tried to steal the Polish throne. Personal hatred ran deep, but Sobieski understood what others didn't. If Vienna fell, Poland would be next. The power dynamics were simple. The Ottoman military machine was perfection itself. Janissary infantry trained from childhood, Serbian engineers who could undermine any wall, supply systems that could feed 300,000 men. Against this stood fractured European kingdoms that couldn't agree on anything except that Vienna's fall meant the end of Christian Europe. Vienna itself was the prize that would unlock a continent. Control it, and you controlled the Danube. Control the Danube, and no army could stop your march to Paris, Madrid, or Rome. Mustafa saw it clearly. One city, one siege, and Europe would kneel. But how do you besiege a city that refuses to die? The ground shook on July 7, 1683, as the Ottoman host appeared before Vienna. Witnesses couldn't agree on numbers 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. The uncertainty itself was a weapon. When you can't count your enemy, fear multiplies faster than mathematics. But here's what the Ottoman scouts' missed numbers tell only part of the story. Yes, Mustafa commanded between 100,000 and 300,000 men, the largest army assembled in a generation. His janissaries carried the latest muskets, trained to reload in under 30 seconds. The siege train included 130 massive cannons, some firing stone balls weighing 1,000 pounds. Serbian miners, the best in the world, could dig tunnels that would make the earth swallow whole city walls. The Ottoman camp stretched for miles, not just an army but a mobile city. Silk tents arranged in perfect order, exotic animals from 3 continents, kitchens that could feed a kingdom. Mustafa's personal tent required 500 camels to transport. This wasn't just warfare, it was psychological dominance. "Look at our wealth," it said, and despair. Against this stood Vienna's 22,500 defenders, already reduced by disease and desertion to perhaps 20,000. Militia mixed with professional soldiers, bakers beside knights. Their advantages? Those star-shaped walls that turned every angle into a killing field. Underground tunnels where defenders could hear Ottoman miners coming. And Ernst von Starhemberg, who seemed to be everywhere at once, turning fear into fierce determination. But the real hope raced from the north. King John III Sobieski led 18,000 Polish cavalry, including 3,000 Winged Hussars elite heavy cavalry, whose reputation alone could break enemy morale. Each hussar wore armor weighing 65 pounds, bulletproof against Ottoman muskets at distance. Their lances stretched 19 feet, outreaching any infantry weapon, and those wings, massive frames of feathers attached to their backs, they served no military purpose anyone could explain. Yet, the Imperial Relief Force added 50,000 German and Austrian infantry, professional soldiers who knew their business. Together with the Poles, perhaps 70,000, 90,000 men marched to face Mustafa's host. Bad odds, but not impossible, if they arrived in time. Sobieski's personal stake went beyond strategy. His own kingdom bordered Ottoman territory. If Vienna fell, Poland faced invasion within months. But more than that, at 54, fighting through arthritis that made mounting his horse agony, this might be his last great battle. He'd spent his life fighting Ottomans. Vienna would be his masterpiece, or his tomb. The Kahlenberg Heights overlooked Vienna. Whoever controlled those hills controlled the battle. Mustafa knew it, but believed no relief force could arrive before the city fell. His spies reported Sobieski was still 2 weeks away. The Ottomans settled in for a traditional siege, confident in their overwhelming superiority. In his silk pavilion, surrounded by luxury, Mustafa studied his maps. Vienna's walls were crumbling. Food would run out within days. The defenders were exhausted. He ordered his servants to prepare a victory feast for September 13th. On July 14th, the earth itself began to shake. Day 1 through 20 established the rhythm of doom. 300 Ottoman cannons fired in sequence, a rolling thunder that never stopped. Each day, 300 cannonballs slammed into Vienna's walls. The mathematical precision was terrifying. Every shot calculated, every impact mapped. Buildings near the walls simply ceased to exist, ground into dust by relentless bombardment. But Starhemberg had prepared for this. Citizens worked through the night, building secondary walls behind damaged sections. When Ottoman cannons created a breach, they found another wall waiting. Frustration mounted in the Ottoman camp. This should have been easier. Days 21 through 40 brought a new terror: the war underground. Serbian miners began their work, digging toward Vienna's walls. The defenders could hear them, picks and shovels creating a rhythm of approaching doom. But Vienna had its own miners. What followed was warfare in absolute darkness, men fighting with knives in tunnels so narrow they couldn't stand, racing to collapse each other's works before the walls above tumbled. Then, the defenders found something in the Ottoman tunnels that chilled their blood enough gunpowder to erase entire city sections. 20,000 pounds in one tunnel alone. If these charges detonated simultaneously, Vienna would simply disappear. Days 41 through 55 introduced the cruelest enemy starvation. Bread disappeared first, then meat. Cats sold for a week's wages. Mothers boiled leather to feed their children. Soldiers received half rations, then quarter rations. The weakest began dying, not from Ottoman bullets but from hunger. But Vienna had one advantage the Ottomans couldn't calculate: Ernst von Starhemberg's iron will. Shot in the shoulder on day 43, he refused to leave the walls. When subordinates suggested negotiation, he responded, Tell Mustafa Vienna will be his grave or mine. There is no third option. Days 56 through 59 saw the final push. Ottoman miners successfully detonated charges under the Berg bastion. Walls that had stood for centuries crumbled in seconds. Janissaries poured through the breach, Vienna hours from falling. But then something happened that no military manual could explain. The starving defenders, who should have broken, instead fought with desperate fury. Bakers with pikes stood beside knights with swords. Women threw stones from rooftops. Children carried ammunition. Every yard cost the Ottomans blood. Meanwhile, Sobieski force marched through hostile territory. 18 days to cover 220 miles, cavalry maintaining a pace that destroyed horses. His scouts brought desperate news Vienna couldn't last another week. Then another message. Vienna might not last another day. The Polish king faced an agonizing choice. Rest his exhausted army and arrive too late, or push forward and risk fighting while depleted. Sobieski chose speed over safety. Men slept in their saddles. Horses died and were left behind. The Winged Hussars, carrying the heaviest armor, suffered most, but they pressed on. On September 11th, as Vienna prepared for what might be its last sunrise, Ottoman confidence peaked. Mustafa toured his siege lines, satisfied. One more push tomorrow, and Europe's greatest fortress would fall. He retired to his silk tent, studying maps of territories he'd soon conquer. At 3 a.m. on September 12th, Ottoman sentries on the Kahlenberg Heights reported morning mist. Nothing unusual. The mist seemed to glitter strangely, but sunrise did that sometimes. By 4 a.m., the mist resolved into something impossible armor. Thousands upon thousands of armored men, covering the hills like metal snow. The next 30 seconds would determine the fate of millions. Ottoman drummers beat the alarm. Mustafa emerged from his tent, looking up at the heights. His mathematical mind calculated quickly. This wasn't possible. The relief force was still days away. His spies had confirmed it. But mathematics meant nothing when the wings appeared. As the sun rose behind them, 3,000 winged hussars crested the ridge, their feathers creating an otherworldly silhouette. To Ottoman eyes, it looked like angels of death had descended from heaven. On September 11th, as Vienna prepared for its last sunrise, watchmen spotted something impossible on the Kahlenberg Heights. Dawn, September 12th, 1683. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as 90,000 Christian soldiers assembled on the Kahlenberg Heights. Below them, 300,000 Ottomans scrambled to reorganize. Mustafa's tactical genius showed within minutes. His army faced two directions, ready to fight both Vienna's garrison and the relief force. 4 a.m. brought revelation and terror. Ottoman commanders realized they faced not just any relief force but King John Sobieski himself. Veterans who'd faced the Lion of Lechistan before felt their confidence crack. Still, they had overwhelming numbers. How much could one old king matter? 5 a.m. First blood. German infantry under Charles of Lorraine struck Ottoman positions on the heights. Professional soldiers meeting professional soldiers. The clash rang like hammers on anvils. Musket fire rolled down the slopes, punctuated by cannon blasts that shook the earth. Neither side gave ground easily. But here's what the Ottoman scouts missed. This wasn't the main attack. Sobieski watched from the highest point, studying Ottoman dispositions like a chess, master planning 10 moves ahead. Let them think this was just another relief attempt. Let them commit their reserves. 8 a.m. brought the first crisis. Ottoman elite troops counterattacked with devastating effect. The German left wing buckled, then began to break. Janissaries pushed forward, sensing victory. One more push, and the relief force would shatter. Mustafa allowed himself a smile. Perhaps that victory feast wouldn't need to be postponed after all. But then Polish infantry appeared exactly where needed, led by Sobieski's own son Jakub. Not charging wildly, but advancing in disciplined ranks, filling gaps with mechanical precision. The German retreat stopped. The line held. The Ottomans had missed their chance. 10 a.m. turned the battle into a meat grinder. Village by village fighting, each house a fortress. Ottoman troops defended with desperate courage, knowing retreat meant death. Christian forces pushed forward yard by bloody yard. Casualties mounted horrifically. Nearly 10,000 men fell in these first 8 hours. Then came noon, and with it, Ernst von Starhemberg's moment. Watching from Vienna's walls, he saw Ottoman reserves moving to face the relief force. The besiegers had become the besieged. Starhemberg ordered something that defied every military manual, a sortie by his starving garrison. Vienna's gates opened. 10,000 skeletal defenders poured out, more walking dead than living soldiers. They struck Ottoman siege lines from behind, creating chaos. Defenders who'd eaten cats and leather now fought like demons. 60 days of suffering transformed into rage. The psychological impact was devastating. Ottoman troops, caught between two forces, felt the first tremors of panic. But these were still the Sultan's finest. Janissary commanders restored order with brutal efficiency. Elite troops countercharged both threats, pushing back Vienna's sortie, holding the line against the relief force. 2 p.m. brought exhaustion to both armies. The fighting slowed, soldiers too tired to raise swords. Water became more precious than ammunition. Both sides knew the decisive moment approached. Whoever summoned strength for one final push would win the day. Sobieski gathered his cavalry commanders. The Austrian princes urged caution: wait for Ottoman exhaustion. Attack tomorrow with rested troops. But the Polish king understood something they didn't. Battles like this turned on moments of perfect opportunity. That moment was now. Gentlemen, Sobieski announced, we have them exactly where we want them. Tired, confused, stretched between two fronts. One charge, one perfect charge, and this army breaks. 4 p.m. 18,000 cavalry began forming on the heights. At the center, 3,000 winged hussars took position. These were the finest heavy cavalry in existence, each man noble-born, trained from childhood. Their armor gleamed despite the march. Those mysterious wings caught the afternoon Sunday. Sobieski rode to the front, raising his saber. The signal every man awaited. Priests blessed the assembled cavalry. The king's voice carried across the ranks. Warriors of Christ, below us stands the enemy of our faith, the destroyer of our lands. Today, we are God's hammer. Let us strike. 4:15 p.m. Movement began. First at a walk, 18,000 horsemen descending the slopes. The sound started low rhythmic thunder of hooves. Ottoman soldiers looked up from their fighting, saw the hillside moving, covered in metal and wings. 4:20 p.m. Trot to canter. The thunder grew. Ottoman commanders screamed orders, trying to swing cannons toward the charge. Too late. Artillery needs time to aim, and time had run out. Some Ottoman infantry formed squares, the traditional defense against cavalry. Others simply stared. 4:25 p.m. Full gallop. The largest cavalry charge in human history reached terminal velocity. The sound became deafening, 72,000 hooves striking earth in rolling thunder. But another sound rose above it, the wings. Those useless decorations created an unearthly shriek as wind passed through feathers. To exhausted Ottoman troops, it sounded like death himself approached. Here's the moment when supreme confidence becomes fatal weakness. The Ottoman army was too large. Commands took minutes to travel from Mustafa to his units. By the time orders arrived, reality had changed. The perfect military machine became a liability. 300,000 men trying to react to something they'd never faced. 4:30 p.m. Impact. What happened next still gives military historians chills. The Winged Hussars hit the Ottoman lines at 35 miles per hour. Lances 19 feet long struck first, punching through infantry formations like paper. The weight of armored horse and rider, nearly a ton combined, carried unstoppable momentum. But the real shock wasn't physical. It was psychological. Ottoman soldiers, even elite janissaries, had never faced heavy cavalry of this caliber. Their muskets, deadly against infantry, couldn't stop the armored riders. Their formations, perfect against normal attacks, crumbled before the massive weight. A young Polish Hussar, riding his first battle, later described the moment like hitting a wall of flesh that simply disappeared. My lance passed through 3 men before breaking. I drew my saber and found no one left to fight, only backs running away. An Ottoman veteran of 20 battles stood his ground for exactly 3 seconds before the sight broke his courage. Devils with wings descending from heaven, he gasped before turning to run. The wings weren't for flying, they were for psychological warfare, and they worked perfectly. 5 p.m. Collapse. What followed wasn't battle but execution. The Ottoman center disintegrated. Elite janissaries, who'd never retreated in their history, threw down weapons and ran. The panic spread like wildfire through 300,000 men. Within minutes, the most disciplined army in the world became a mob. Mustafa watched his life's ambition die in less time than his afternoon prayers. His magnificent tent, requiring 500 camels to transport, stood abandoned as he fled on horseback. The Ottoman battle plans for conquering Rome lay scattered in mud, trampled by fleeing soldiers. In 4 hours, the Ottoman Empire's European dream died, but the killing wasn't over. The rout that followed defied comprehension. How do 300,000 men run at once? Like a human avalanche, Ottoman soldiers fled in every direction. Those closest to the Danube faced a terrible choice. Polish sabres behind, drowning ahead. 15,000 chose the river. 5,000 never reached the opposite shore, pulled down by equipment or trampled by desperate comrades. King Sobieski rode through Mustafa's abandoned camp in disbelief. The luxury surpassed European palaces' silk carpets worth kingdoms, golden artifacts, jeweled weapons. In the commander's tent, he found operational maps showing planned conquests, Rome by Christmas, Paris by spring. The Ottoman Empire hadn't come for one city, they'd come for a continent. But physical wealth paled beside the strategic treasure. Sobieski captured the Ottoman war chest enough gold to finance armies for years, food supplies that could feed cities. Most importantly, 130 siege cannons, abandoned in panic. The starving defenders of Vienna suddenly possessed enough supplies for months. The statistics defied military logic. 20,000 Ottomans dead versus 2,000 coalition casualties. A 10-to-1 casualty ratio in an age when 2-to-1 was considered decisive victory. The cream of Ottoman military power, elite janissaries, veteran cavalry, master engineers erased in an afternoon. Vienna's gates opened to surreal scenes. Citizens who'd boiled leather for sustenance now wept openly, falling to their knees before Polish horsemen. Women kissed the hooves of horses that had delivered them. Children, skeletal from starvation, touched the wings of hussars like holy relics. The city that had prepared for death, instead, witnessed resurrection. Starhemberg, the Iron Commander who'd held through impossible odds, finally allowed exhaustion to show. Meeting Sobieski, he struggled for words adequate to the moment. The Polish king, still in battle armor, simply embraced him. Sometimes, history needs no words. But even in victory's first hours, cracks appeared. Emperor Leopold I, who'd fled Vienna rather than face siege, now raced back to claim glory. His jealousy of Sobieski, the foreign king who'd saved his capital, poisoned what should have been pure celebration. Political aftermath began immediately. Who would claim the Ottoman wealth? Who commanded the pursuit? Leopold wanted Sobieski gone, before Vienna's citizens proclaimed him their true savior. The Polish king, aware of the irony, prepared his message to Pope Innocent XI. Veni, vidi, Deus visit. I came, I saw, God conquered, modifying Caesar's boast to give credit where due. Meanwhile, Mustafa's flight became a journey through hell. The architect of the siege now executed subordinates for failure, as if their courage could have stopped Polish lances. His magnificent army dissolved like morning mist. Garrisons abandoned fortresses held for generations. The Ottoman retreat became a rout stretching to Belgrade. The immediate consequences rippled across Europe. Buda, under Ottoman control for 145 years, would fall within months. The Ottoman tide, advancing for centuries, began its permanent ebb. Christian armies, energized by Vienna's miracle, pushed into territories thought lost forever. But the battle's end was just the beginning of Europe's transformation. The Ottoman Empire never recovered from those 4 hours on September 12th. Within years, Hungary slipped from their grasp. The The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 codified what Vienna had begun: Ottoman retreat from Europe. The empire that had threatened to engulf Christianity entered permanent decline, the sick man of Europe, by the next century. Austria's trajectory reversed completely. From besieged victim to ascending power, the Habsburg Empire emerged as Europe's dominant force. Vienna, nearly erased, became the glittering capital of European culture. The city that almost died birthed Mozart, Beethoven, architectural wonders. But history reserves its cruelest ironies for heroes. Poland, Europe's savior, received no lasting reward. Within a century, the kingdom that produced the Winged Hussars was partitioned between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. The nation that saved Western civilization disappeared from maps for 123 years. Kara Mustafa met his fate in Belgrade on Christmas Day, 1683. Sultan Mehmed IV's silk cord ended the life of the man who'd lost Islam's greatest opportunity. Strangulation, the Ottoman method for failed commanders. His final words remain unrecorded, but his failure echoed through centuries. Yet from catastrophe came culture. Vienna's coffeehouse tradition, pride of the city, allegedly began with Ottoman coffee supplies abandoned in the rout. Truth or legend, the defeated enemy's drink became the victor's social revolution. Every Viennese cafe owes its existence to that September day. The military implications transformed European warfare. Heavy cavalry, thought obsolete against gunpowder, proved devastating when properly employed. The psychological weapon of the Winged Hussars influenced military thinking for generations. Sometimes, ancient tactics, perfectly timed, trump modern technology. Religious impact resonated equally. The last great crusade saw Catholic and Protestant armies unite against a common threat. Theological enemies became battlefield brothers. Vienna proved faith could still move mountains, or at least stop armies. Modern parallels emerge clearly. David versus Goliath remains humanity's favorite story because we live it repeatedly. Small, determined forces defeating larger but overconfident enemies. The principle remains: courage plus timing beats numbers. Desperation, properly channeled, becomes strength. But the deeper lesson transcends military history. Empires fall not from single defeats but from hubris. Mustafa's silk tent, his premature victory feast, his assumption of inevitable triumph. These mental defeats preceded physical destruction. The Ottomans lost Vienna before the Hussars charged. Consider this: 300,000 men fled from 18,000. Not from superior weapons or tactics alone, but from psychological collapse. When certainty meets impossibility, certainty shatters. The wings of the Hussars carried no military value except the power to break minds before breaking bodies. Vienna teaches us about moments. History pivots on individual decisions at precise instants. Sobieski's choice to charge at 4 p.m., not 5 p.m. or the next dawn, changed civilization's course. Timing isn't everything, it's the only thing. Now you understand why September 12th matters. Not just as military history but as proof that impossible odds exist to be beaten. That sometimes, on rare afternoons when courage meets opportunity, 18,000 can, indeed, defeat 300,000. Because on that day, God wore Polish armor, and mathematics bowed before human will.